invitation. I had to have you. That NLP is a interesting, very interesting topic. So
no problem. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Vikram.
yeah, but I have to tell you that, like, before I get you in and we ask you about yourself, it'll take 1 minute. I would want you to tell me as much as you know about the conference. Otherwise, I'll fill in whenever, whatever. I just felt that people telling me it's so nice to hear that.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid you're probably going to be the best person to tell people about the conference. I've caught parts of it, but I don't have the big picture.
Perfect. So basically, the idea was that let's put out Mediation Vision 2026. The World Mediators Conference was started on 18th May because I'm celebrating that as World Mediators Day, because it's Ken Cloke's birthday. And the person that he is, for me, represents mediators in every aspect, because it's the heart, soul, spirituality thing. You will hear me say that a lot of times. And what he brings in as a person, it's been really nice knowing him and him on my events. So that's the whole idea. That was the idea on the day. And the whole concept of evolution of mediators and mediation has been the theme of the work that I've been doing. But there's so much evolution that has to. Actually, my first show this started with Ken Cloke. Is called Evolution of a Mediator. Because I've always said that, look, you don't make mediators in 40-hour factories. There's so much that goes into them. Let's go into that history. And I'm saying history means we've gone into grandparents, parents. Bernie Mayer was there. 2 episodes. He did not come into the world. We were only on his grandparents and his parents growing up. And he was saying, now get me into the world kind of thing. So 3rd episode, he came into the world because it's a detailed thing. Let's understand. I mean, there's so much in terms of value system. The value systems that you're brought up in, it's an important aspect. So that's where it started. So that's the whole idea behind the conference. The thing was that everyone was asked that choose a topic, whatever you were comfortable with. So it just grew. I also did not know how many days is going to be. It was started with a Wednesday and Saturday. Then, of course, as people came in, all days of the week kind of came up.
It basically was organic, right? It grew by itself,
exactly.
Which is I think a nice metaphor for mediation as well.
Exactly. That's the whole idea. Everything, my conversations on my shows are like that. Sometimes Ken tells me, you're doing so much for the conflict resolution world. I say, what do I do? I just have conversations. That's all that I do. So that's the whole idea. Let's just let it flow. There is no, I tell everyone, I don't know anything. I'm illiterate. I just want to take it as conversations. I'm picking up, I'm learning. So that's how it is. So Joel, that's the background. That's the background. Now it's you. It's about you. It's about NLP, about wherever you take it. Like I told you that I'll come in when you want me to come in. Yeah.
Sure. Well, as I said, I'm very happy for this to be a conversation. This is one of sort of like my pet topics. So it's one of those things that is very hard to get me to shut up once I get going. So Vikram, feel free to shut me up from time to time or to jump in with a question. Let me maybe share a little bit about how I encountered NLP in the first place and how it's impacted on me, and then I can share a little bit with you about what NLP is, and then we'll take it from there.
About yourself also.
Oh, about myself first. I'm a trained lawyer. I was educated in law in New Zealand. I ran away from Singapore to study in New Zealand. If you ask me, the official reasons, I like sheep. But that was a sheep joke, so let's not go there. I tell the worst jokes. I hope you realize.
I love them. I've heard them. I hear them in your webinars and everything.
Excellent.
I enjoy them.
Yeah, so I like sheep, and I was introduced to negotiation and mediation at a very young age, in a sense of my legal training in New Zealand, and I want to honor my teacher at that point in time, Ian McDuff, who is a dear friend of mine, but was one of my influences in negotiation and mediation. And I remember one of his classes, he had said to me. He said to the class, well, there's this thing called, neuro-linguistic programming. And it's about, using words a certain way and seeing and hearing and feeling. And so that stuck in my mind. He didn't say much about it. At that point in time, the internet didn't really exist. So there was no opportunity to go and do a search. And it just got filed away. And I was just more into mediation and negotiation than I was into NLP at that point in time. When I came back to Singapore, I got a position at the National University of Singapore Law School. And I had the opportunity to encounter a 4-day workshop on NLP. It was run by my first trainer, Sid Jacobson. He's based in the US, an excellent trainer. He, in fact, does talks with Tony Robbins every year now, if I remember correctly. Anyway, he's a great guy. And I learned the basics of NLP with him, but the buck bit. And so I attribute Sid Jacobson with two things. Number one, for introducing me, giving me a very good foundation to NLP, but at the same time, showing me that it was actually possible to tell really bad jokes during training. And so I blame him for that as well. Then I went to the US to study for my master's and all that. And I did my continuing training. So I did what we refer to as the practitioner course, the master practitioner course, and the trainer's training. So I'm a certified trainer of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, we call it NLP for short. I've essentially applied NLP, not just in my personal life, but in my professional life as a mediator, as a teacher, as a trainer. And the amount of time and financial resources I put into it is actually more than sort of, paid itself back in a sense, not necessarily in monetary terms, but in terms of personal value. And professional value. So that's kind of my history with NLP in a nutshell. It's been very, very helpful in many ways. It's also very misunderstood. So I must tell you this story, which I think our listeners must take as a public service announcement. And there was at one point somebody accused me literally of teaching the occult, because I was teaching NLP, and I had to move hell and high water to explain to people, no, that's got nothing to do with the occult. It's got to do with how the human brain works and how we communicate and how we can enhance that communication. But there's still a lot of misunderstandings. That was 30 years ago. Fortunately, people don't tell me it's the occult today. They don't try to burn me at the stake. That's pretty good, and it's an improvement. I think I've improved my lot in life. It's where I am right now. So I feel very comfortable just talking about it and sharing the ideas with people who are interested in learning and interested in improving their ability to connect, which is pretty much where NLP comes from. Yeah.
The good thing is that being introduced to a subject by the right person, I think that makes all the difference. I think that's
absolutely. And I've had the fortune of having good teachers in my life that have introduced me to things at the correct times. And I like to pay it forward. I like to return the favor.
So that's actually been the idea of calling, because I'm selective about who comes in on my shows, because they represent mediators, and people don't really have a face for mediators in the world. I mean, of course, they're mature markets. I'm not saying they're mature markets where people might, but in those mature markets also I've spoken to people, and there's still a lot of people don't know about mediation. So putting a face to a mediator comes much later. So I said, of course, putting the right people there, and then to introduce people to a subject in the right way, because that makes all the difference. So that's why I think that's why people maybe connect to what I do, is because of that. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think people can sense and appreciate sincerity. I think fundamentally, and the intention counts, right? I know in English we have this saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And it's true. Sometimes despite our best intentions, we mess up. But I think people do appreciate that kind of good intentions and sincerity. I think they can sense it from us.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why the right people being out there, and because finally it's about, I think, connecting with the person. For me, I think the subject kind of comes secondary. For me, it's that person, that, like you said, where is the person coming from, and that connection, I think, is really important. I think that's why NLP and Joel is connected to each other, and people will connect to the subject so much better because of you. That's the
very kind of you to say. Very kind of you to say. Yeah. So I'm sure what must be on the foremost of many people's minds is, what is this creature called NLP, right? And I could give you so NLP stands for, and for those of you who have not heard yet, or who've just joined us, for example, brace yourselves, right? Because the name is frightening. I'll tell you first, because somebody decided that we're going to sound very intellectual and creative. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and what really scares people is actually the word programming. Because they think it's about brainwashing and mind control, and probably where the connection of the occult is. Well, the simplest way for me to explain what programming is this. Vikram, if you could just do me a favor, could you just relax for a moment and cross your arms for me? Could you just do that?
Like that?
Just cross your arms. I promise I'm not sort of playing a trick on you. Yeah. And even though we cannot see your arms, we'll take it as cross. If you
Okay, I'll
look
put it
down,
up
yeah,
here.
that's fine. I can appreciate it. If you can look down and notice whether you cross your right arm over your left or your left arm over
Look,
your right.
actually, I will do this. Actually, I will do this.
Right.
But the space is such that I want. Okay, this is how
I get it. Okay.
That's my
So
right
now
arm
you
at the back, left arm on the top.
great. So your left is
It's
over
like
your
actually
right. Yeah.
it'll be like this. It'll be like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, left on top.
Okay.
Left on top. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Now, freeze for a moment, and in a moment, I'd like you to cross your arms, but the other way. Go ahead and do that now.
Well, how do I do that? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, and now that you cross your arms the other way, I'm guessing that it feels a little bit unnatural. It feels a little bit, strange. Yeah. Would that be fair to say if you crossed it the other way?
Yeah. I won't be that comfortable. Naturally go to that. It'll naturally go to that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what programming means. And you can uncross your arms if you wish. I would say actually 90 out of 100 people will generally cross their arms the other way and feel it's just a little bit unnatural. It's unnatural because it's not familiar to us. It's not a habit. So programming was just a nice fancy way of saying that human beings have habits and that we primarily function from habits, right? So put very simply, neuro-linguistic programming is the study of how our neurology, in other words, our nervous system, the way we take in information, and our language interact in ways that become habitual, right? So if we understand how people habitually process information and can take in information, by adjusting our own communication, we can connect with them far more easily. Now, it's a lot more complex than that, of course, but put very simply, it's just a connection of the neurology, language, linguistic, and the habits, the programming that we engage in. Right. So if we understand that, we can enhance communication, we can help people make significant life changes, strangely enough. Now, I'm not going to talk about significant life changes because this is not a therapy workshop, right? But in a sense, when we're talking about communication, mediation, connecting with people, NLP is right up that alley. And that's where I come from a lot of the time when I talk about NLP.
Perfect. So you're going to take us, because with the linguistic aspect of it, because obviously you're looking at verbal and non-verbal, as I see.
Exactly.
So that part of it, I just want to, because I would think linguistic would be language as in the spoken language and that kind of, so non-verbal also fits in there, definitely.
Absolutely. And the other way to think about it is not just how we communicate between people, but how we communicate internally with ourselves. Right. So some of us probably are familiar with what we call an internal voice, right? That we actually talk to ourselves, right? I know 30 years ago, if you talk to yourself, they would institutionalize you. Today, this is good. Having a good internal voice, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes the problem is you have too many internal voices. My mom's in my head. I don't know how she got there. Life happens. But fundamentally, the field of NLP was born as a result of two gentlemen, John Grinder and Richard Bandler. These were the founders of NLP. And this was in the 70s. And they were interested in what made the difference between people who were excellent communicators and people who were not effective at all. That was really the question they asked themselves. So they began to study the three most effective communication experts that existed during that time. Right. These happened to be therapists. So they studied Fritz Perls, who is known as the father of modern Gestalt therapy. They studied Virginia Satir, who is known as the mother of systemic family therapy. Right. Even her work right now is taught in social work and so on and so forth. And then the final person they studied was a medical doctor who was also a clinical hypnotherapist. So his name was Milton Erickson. Until his death in the 1980s, he was the world's foremost clinical hypnotherapist. And so they studied these three people because they had the reputation of being able to communicate effectively, as well as being able to get people to make changes in their lives. And what they were doing seemed to be miraculous. So Bandler and Grinder, which were the co-founders, said, I want to learn how to do that. So they went to study these guys and realized that even though they had different ways of doing their therapy, they had patterns of human interaction that were in common. So what Bandler and Grinder said is, okay, if we try it on ourselves, they found that it improved their ability to communicate just like that. Then they also found that if they taught it to other people, it also improved their ability to communicate just like that. So the field of NLP was born, right? And I'm going to tell you a funny story about why it's called programming. In the 70s, computers were in vogue. So to sound more important, they wanted to use a word from the computer field. So they used the word programming, right? If it was named today, it might be named something else, right? But Neuro-Linguistic programming, NLP, was taken in the sense some of the language was taken from the computer field, as it were, right? So fundamentally, that was the field of NLP was born. Bandler and Grinder continued to study examples of excellence elsewhere. Excellent managers, excellent healers, excellent doctors, excellent teachers, trainers, and so on and so forth. And so now if you were to take an NLP course, you would learn a lot of the technique they have isolated, but NLP itself, the field, is actually a process of modeling and replicating human excellence. Right. So if I encounter a great mediator, I can model that and take some of those patterns and make myself as a better mediator. That's part of the idea. So actually, these ideas aren't different from what you, Vikram, and I, and many of our listeners are familiar with already, and I'll explain why. When we take a 40-hour mediation course, right, our trainers generally teach us what they would consider best practices, right? Processes, things to say, how to say it, active listening, and so on and so forth. A lot of this is what NLP seeks to replicate, right? So excellent training programs already have a component of NLP within it because they are actually modeling what the best mediators do and translating that into the training room so that the participants can actually learn and do that very, very well.
Perfect. But when you said systemic family therapy, so yeah. I mean, totally maybe disconnected from that, but we've been talking, I mean, there's Gabriela in Brazil who talks about systemic constellations, family
yep.
constellations.
Yep.
Is this, I mean, with what this person, Virginia, was doing, was it connected to that aspect?
Yes. Yes and no, right? So nowadays many things are repackaged. So it sounds different. It looks a little bit different, but actually might be from the same sources. But the notion of it being systemic is just the understanding that human beings operate within systems. Whether we operate within sort of feed-forward systems that when two people have a conversation, or we operate within a family system or a national system, we fit within something that actually influences us much larger than just your individual or two people, pretty much it, right? So if what little I understand of systems constellation therapy or work is basically being able to map out where a person is relative to a lot of other people within their system, right? Virginia Satir was probably one of the first people to realize that when she was doing therapy with a client, that client, she could change the client and help the client change in the room. But when that client went back to his or her family system, that system would change him or her back. So her theory was if changing one person wasn't going to work, I needed to pull the whole system into the room. So she was well known for having a meeting, which included the client, the parents, the grandchildren, the grandparents. So basically the dog, the cat, everyone was there. And basically she worked with the system more than working with just the individual, right? And so that's a long-winded way of saying there is actually a connection, because I think constellation systems work basically grew from a lot from what Virginia grew from as well. The idea that people operated within systems and are affected by systems.
Well, when she told me about it, I was really interested. So I said, let's do something, a practical one. We didn't do it. We didn't put it on YouTube because there was one individual who was talking about her situation and she was working on that. But the interesting point was if she asked this person to kind of designate people for certain things. Not in that thing, we were not talking about designating in this as a father or mother. It was a general thing. Designate them as colors and pieces. The people who were designated as that, they said they were actually feeling something different, and I found that really interesting. How does that work? I I still don't understand how that works. But and these are people. Look, these are not people that she's brought in. People I brought in. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, no, there's an entire area called psychodrama, which is which helps people make changes or even rehearse for conflict situations. using exactly these methods. You get people to play certain roles, certain even inanimate objects, for example, and that somehow helps them sort of make those shifts.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking if that person making the shift is okay, but this other person who's been told to play that role, she said, I'm feeling, the other person is saying, I'm feeling uncomfortable and this and that. I found that really, how does that hold? Because she does, I mean, Gabriela talks about that connection somewhere, but I was like actually listening to them. I mean, I have to delve a little deeper into that concept of systemic constellation, definitely.
Yes, but I think someone like Gabrielle would very cleanly, when she closes the session, make sure that everybody is returned to a place which is better than when they started. We would never do anything like, make someone feel a certain way and then leave them worse off. I think that's not ethical.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to tell us about the applications of NLP.
Yeah. So I think most of the time, I mean, there are many areas in which we can apply NLP, right? But the two main areas that I would say to mediators, if they wanted to apply NLP, would be in two areas. Number one is enhancing communication, and number two, developing rapport with the parties, or with the advocates and so on, or with their co-mediator. Now, there are other things that we can do. For example, you can use NLP to address perception and bias. Mediators do that also. So that's important. We learn how to purposefully use language. We learn how to reframe. We understand personality preferences so that we can package communication to fit those preferences. And so all those are things that I also teach when I talk about mediation. If any of our listeners are interested, I write the Clue Mediation blog, and my blog is usually talks about sort of a neuro-linguistic approach to a toolbox for a mediator. So all these are so people who are interested in reading a little bit more about this, they could go there and get a little bit more of an idea about rapport and enhancing communication and so on.
But you're going to you're going to send me a link to that so I can put it on the post also.
Sure, I will do that a little bit later, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, right. So I think fundamentally what the starting off point is understanding how, from an NLP perspective, we process a communication. So in what we call the Nlp communication model. Okay, and I'll be as brief as I possibly can.
Why do you want to be brief, Joel? Please you have to take out time for people who will be there, who suddenly get interested. Don't be brief.
Okay.
Look, I have all the time in the world because this is only one session in the morning, in the afternoon.
Great. No, that's great.
So I said, let's now. There's nothing else happening. So it was something.
Okay.
Totally.
All right. So fundamentally, the idea is that the world exists, right? The world exists. And the only way we can appreciate that the world exists is through our five senses, right? So if we were in the same room, the only way somebody would know I would exist is you could see me, hear me. If they could physically touch me, they could smell me if I hadn't showered for a while. I'm not going to go with taste, but theoretically, it is possible, right? What we call the five unaided senses. Now, I'm not going to have a fight about the sense of humor or nonsense or sixth sense, right? But essentially, it's the five senses that we unaided interact with the world, right? Now, this is why the movie The Matrix, I don't know, Vikram, if you remember the movie, the original Matrix, some years ago now, was such a mind-blowing movie because it basically meant that you could be fooled if they were just pumping false inputs into your head. You could think you were alive, but actually you were just a bio battery, right? And so the idea generally in NLP is that information exists, the world exists, but the only way we can appreciate it is subjectively. In other words, in NLP's perspective, objectivity cannot exist. And even if it does exist, we cannot appreciate them as human beings because we can only have a subjective perspective of it. Yeah. Right. So from that perspective, if the external world exists, we'll just turn my head for a moment. If the external world exists and it comes to my five senses, right, I then have a memory or an experience, what we call an internal representation of the world inside our head. Now, but here's the problem, right? Information scientists estimate that at any point in time, 2 billion bits of information bombard our nervous system. 2 billion. Okay, I think the number is far higher than that. Psychologists estimate that our conscious mind can accept only 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at any one point. So if you think about it, 2 billion bits, 7 plus or minus 2. So the psychologists go on to say is that if you became consciously aware of 2 billion bits, you would go crazy. So the human nervous system must have a way of filtering out information that's not relevant to you at any point in time. So we'll do an experiment right now. Don't take my word for it. We'll just do a quick experiment. Our friends who are listening into this, just for a moment, as you sit there or you're standing, you're listening to what I'm saying, you're probably looking at me. You're probably admiring Vikram's beautiful beard. That's a lovely beard. I'm only jealous because I can't grow a beard.
Let me tell you, they can't see me. They can only see you.
Oh, really? Oh,
yes.
Well, then you'll have to take my word that he's got a beautiful beard. But here's the thing: you're probably not paying attention to the feeling in your left toe until now. Now, your left toe has always been there. Now, I apologize if you don't have a left toe. I apologize. I'm not to know that. Okay, but your left toe has always been there. And now that you're paying attention to it, you're probably thinking, oh, maybe it might be itchy, it might feel a little bit warm, a little bit moist, maybe cool, right? Okay. But it's always been there. It's just that because it was not relevant to you at that point in time, your nervous system deletes, distorts, and generalizes information that is not relevant to you. In other words, it makes you pay attention to 7 plus or minus 2, right? This explains why 2 people can go to the same movie or the same party and leave with vastly differing memories of what happened, right? This is why lawyers can succeed cross-examining people, that we can make them believe that the color of the car that was in the scene was blue and not red, when actually it was green, right? Okay, it's the understanding that actually our perceptions are significantly manipulable. Now, from a mediation perspective, we encounter this in terms of bias, right? That when people have a perceptual bias and attribution bias, they will see all the things that will confirm that bias. We call that confirmation bias. And they will delete, distort, and generalize anything that is contrary to that, right? So understanding this then allows us to help shift people's perspective. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So remember, the world exists, comes through the eyes. There's an internal representation, but the internal representation is simply a map of the territory. It is a shadow of reality because a lot of information has been deleted, distorted, generalized. Now, here's the kicker. When I ask you to describe to me what's inside your head, you can only do this with words in whatever language you are fluent in. But when you say the words, your words are a shadow of that reality. Because I'm sure you've experienced this before, right? You're trying to explain something to someone and you just don't have enough words, right? So think about it. The words that we use are a shadow of reality. So the question isn't, how is it possible people can have misunderstandings? The question is, how can they not have misunderstandings, right? And so from an NLP perspective, and this maybe is the first takeaway point that people may want to note down, is that never assume that the words that people use, even if they are the same, mean the same thing. So if I was saying to Vikram right now, Vikram, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm very happy to connect with you. I look forward to a long-term collaborative relationship, right? Now, I know you cannot see Vikram, but Vikram's nodding his head. Those words resonate with him, essentially, yeah. My question is, does Vikram actually know what I meant by any of those words? The answer is no. Vikram knows what he meant by those words. He hears the words, which are quite abstract, things like collaboration, long-term, whatever that means, and he fills in the meaning using his own personal life experiences. So he nods. We shake our hands on it. and we think we're talking about the same thing, but then we're not, right? And that is the nature of language. That is the nature. It's abstract, but we think it actually means certain discrete sorts of things. So when people say "I love you," it might mean completely different things. If I was running a live training, I'd get 5 people to write down what they mean by the word love, and then they realize that something as universal as love, nobody has a common definition, right? Just one of those weird things. So as mediators, one of the things I train myself and other people to do is that I'm always listening out for words which fall into a certain category of vagueness, abstraction, right? And if I understand that it is abstract, I'm gonna bet money, and I'm sure to win, that my understanding of what that means does not actually match their understanding of what that means. So the key skill that I get people to do is firstly recognize what those words are, and then secondly, ask them, Vikram, when you say collaboration, what do you mean? Can you say a little bit more? So you're trying to actually get them down. In Harvard, they call this the ladder of inference. You're trying to get them down into a little bit more grapplable data that you can actually manage and deal with. So Vikram may say, oh, well, actually, by collaboration, I actually mean, long term. I mean that we have deals that both of us can benefit from, and we can benefit the greater mediation society, right? Now, and once I understand that, I go, okay, that matches what I think. Okay, but if Vikram tells me, oh well, collaboration just basically means, for this particular project, we work together, we meet it on time, and we're done, and that doesn't match what I mean by collaboration, I might say, okay, Vikram, thanks for sharing. I have a different way of thinking about collaboration. And maybe we need to sort of talk about that a little bit and clarify, right? So if you can imagine mediating between 2 parties, and one party says some vague abstract motherhood statement, and the other party, oh, that sounds great. If I'm the mediator, the red flags go up, and I'm going to go, well, that's wonderful. Let's hang on a moment. When you guys say this, what can you share? Because I'm a little bit slow today. I haven't had my coffee. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by it. So by diving in to what they might mean by it, okay, you put aside some of the problems that they may face at some point as a result of misunderstandings from language. Does it make sense, Vikram?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I know good communicators intuitively do this, right? But the NLP communication model gives us sort of an understanding of why it actually happens, and therefore heightening our senses to go and look for those situations and correct those situations, right? Okay, so for those of you who are sort of wanting to write down the language, get ready. When you say blank, whatever the word is, can you say more? What do you mean? Right? Can you share a little bit more? I mean, so we use all what we call the softening frames. Don't go to someone like Vikram say something and I go, what do you mean? I mean, that's kind of rude. It'll probably break rapport. Not a good idea. Okay, but essentially, frame it a little bit. Always I do what we call the Columbo Act. Vikram, I don't know how many of our listeners know who Columbo is. He was a television detective, Inspector Columbo, played by Peter Falk in the 70s. And he was a very smart man, but he did not look smart at all. And so he would go around hitting his head going, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit slow. And because everybody thought he was an idiot, he managed to solve crimes that nobody could solve, right? Because he was a sharp man. So I just go, help me understand this. I don't get it, right? And I find that works pretty well. Okay? But now that we've talked about the NLP communication model, right? And in fact, I've used a little bit of it. I'd like to share with you four principles of communication that actually you might find particularly helpful to remember when you are mediating. Okay. Now, the first you've already heard. It's called the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. In other words, the words that we use do not adequately represent what's inside our head. What's inside our head does not adequately represent what's outside. Right. The map is not the territory. Right. So I've got a funny story. If I could share, those of you who are familiar with Singapore, you know that all Singaporean males must do military service. It's compulsory, and so we serve either 2 or 2.5 years. My time was 2.5 years, and I was in a platoon where my buddy my buddy was not the sharpest tack in the box. I won't name him because he's probably someone famous, but he's not the sharpest tack in the box, right? But he was very officious. He was. I could tell you stories about this guy. I won't, but officious as heck. So we were given a map. We were given a map, and we were supposed to get from point A to point B within a certain period of time. And we could not be caught by the enemies, which were played by our officers and our corporals. Right? So this guy grabbed the map from me. He says, I will read the map. You're very bad at reading maps, which is true. I'm very bad at reading maps. My wife laughs at me all the time. I take 2 left turns and I get lost. Right. So my friend reads the map and he goes left, right. So we're navigating through a wooded area. It might surprise some of you to know Singapore still has a forest. So we navigate through this wooded area. And at one point he says, we're almost there. We're making good time, right? Let's go. Because if we go there early, we might gain some kind of a prize, maybe a day off, some extra ration, something like that. And I said, no, I'm not moving. And he looked at me and he goes, what's wrong with you? I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not moving. And he says, he saw at me and he said, look, we're almost there. We're almost there. And I can hear the corporals coming. Why? And I said, put the freaking map down and look. So he put the map down and he looked. There was like a 16-foot drop in front of us. My friend looked at the drop. He looked at the map. He looked at the drop. He looked at the map and then he said, but that's not on the map. Now, I was a geography student. I actually know about erosion. So the map is not the territory, right? So a lot of the time when we mediate or when we negotiate, we go into an interaction and we think to ourselves, okay, we know what's going on here. We know what these parties are like. We know what the problem's about. We can't help that, to be frank. To be frank, we cannot help that. As human beings, this is part of our process. But what's important to realize is that all those things that you have in your head, those maps, may not match the territory. Put another way, you need to be able to realize and notice when it's not matching and update your maps, right? One of my favorite sayings is attributed to Fritz Perls, one of the people that was studied for NLP. Lose your mind and come to your senses, right? Those people who are Buddhists, those people who teach meditation, mindfulness will all go, yes, I know exactly what that means, because we often get lost in our mind. Okay, we become mindful as opposed to mindful, right? Lose your mind and come to your senses. Okay, good advice, not just as a mediator, but for life in general. Yeah, right. So the map is not the territory. First thing to remember is a good rule. Okay, keep that in your mind. Okay, the map is not territory. The second thing to understand then is that the meaning of your communication is the response you get. The meaning of your communication is the response you get. So a lot of the time, if you say something to somebody and they react in a way that's unexpected. So let's say you paid someone a compliment and they act offended, right? Our initial response, our gut response is to actually say, well, there's something wrong with them. They didn't get the message. They're crazy, they're broken, they're spoiled, right? Because we know what we intended. We intended a compliment. NLP flips that over. NLP turns it on its head and it says, well, actually, it doesn't matter what you intend in your communication. What matters is what was the message they received, no matter how inaccurate it was from your perspective. Because if they received a different message, then you got to say, well, hang on a moment, maybe I'm not talking to them in a way that is connecting with them, right? Tell you a very quick story about this. I mentioned a little bit earlier, I get my classes to sometimes do an exercise where they write down a definition of the word love, right? And this was many years ago now. There was a group of 6 students. 5 of them were seated together, and 1 was a little bit apart. So I went up to them and I said, what's going on? And the 5 students looked at me and all of them did this. They pointed to the girl that was sitting alone. So I thought, okay, something's not right here. And I looked at the group's definition, the five that love was all kinds of wonderful things, like love means never having to say you're sorry, love is angels and moonbeams and all of that, right? I went to the girl that was sitting alone, and I looked at her definition. Her definitions were: love is pain, suffering, betrayal, and bondage. Now, I don't think she meant bondage in that way, right? But it was a negative way. And of course, these university students didn't know how to handle such a different worldview, because, hey, love is positive, right? Well, it so turns out, I found after some questioning, that this girl was coming out of an abusive relationship. Her boyfriend was gaslighting her. Her boyfriend was both mentally and physically abusing her. The only love she understood was pain, betrayal, bondage, suffering, right? Whatever people, no matter how people seem that they don't make sense to you, what they're doing and saying makes sense to them. None of us think that we are the unreasonable person. We always think the other side's unreasonable, but guess what? They don't think they're unreasonable either. It makes sense to them, right? So fundamentally, the meaning of your communication is the response you get, not what you intended, right? So as a mediator, this becomes very, very important, because we have seen this. We've seen one party say to another party something, and the other party reacts, and this party over here goes, but that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant to say this, right? Because there might have been a hot button on this side that they were not aware of. Okay, so our ability to communicate is therefore determined by our response ability. If we get feedback and we say, okay, that person's not getting the message that we intend, then we have to find some other way to get that message across, right? Okay, it's a little bit like saying, if there's a wall in front of you and you hit it and it hurts, you hit it harder. Actually, what makes more sense, right? I mean, that seems to be the definition of insanity. I think all of you have heard, right? They attribute this to Einstein. I don't know if it's true that Einstein said this, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Okay, so if there's a wall in front of you, why would you hit it harder? You go around it, you go underneath it, you climb over it, maybe you get a bulldozer and push the wall down, or you open the door and walk through, right? You must have different ways of connecting with somebody else, communicating with someone else, right? So from our perspective then, we adopt this fairly empowering point of view. There is no failure, only feedback. Okay, so if you say something to someone and they don't get it, don't go, I'm a failure. Just basically go, well, okay, that's feedback for me. I need to find some other way to communicate and contact them, right? This itself has been tremendously useful to me, both professionally and personally, communicating with spouses, family members. I don't have children. I've not yet succeeded communicating with my cats yet, but one day I will master talking to my cats. But essentially, if I say something and I'm looking and I lose my mind, I come to my senses and I'm seeing and I'm saying, well, okay, no, I'm not sure that is getting through. I don't go to myself, oh my God, I'm a failure. I don't go to myself, oh my God, they're stupid. I go, okay, try something else. Do anything else, right? So these 4 guidelines, these 4 principles of communication, I invite you to keep in the back of your mind. Number 1, the map is not the territory. Number 2, the meaning of your communication is the response you get. Number 3, there's no failure, only feedback. And number 4, you must develop flexibility in your communication, right? And these 4 things will serve you well if you keep those actually in the back of your mind as you apply these things, right? So I talked a lot for the moment, but essentially what I've shared with you is the Nlp Communication Model, 4 principles of communication, and 1 application, which is, when you say this, what do you mean, right? Seeking clarification, drilling down, getting more data. I'm just going to pause here for a moment, and so I'm going to use Vikram as sort of the surrogate audience to see if there's any questions that you might have with the material covered before we move on.
Look, I'm telling you the interesting observation in the sense, in terms of discussion, the matrix thing that you gave me, day before yesterday, I was talking to someone and I was telling them, we were talking about traveling. And of course, when you talk about traveling, everyone has their experiences in various places. And I was saying, look, finally, those or whatever you see is down to images in your head. And I know this one person who has this, of course, large television. He's watching things on 4K, and you have this whole street view and street walk. And I'm saying he's also putting images in there. So he's going to access and what you're going to access finally is the same. Only thing is that experience of actually standing there. That experience is something which doesn't get captured. And to even go back and say, oh, what was that experience I had at that point? That you also can't relate to. So I'm just thinking was something. I don't know. What your thoughts on that are? I mean, I'm sure
Well,
you'll have
actually,
interesting thoughts.
no, that's actually a great question because not only the communication, human communication is imperfect. The day that Vikram, I can my thoughts to your thoughts, right? Transmit my thoughts through telepathy would be a great day because then you will see exactly what I'm seeing, hear exactly what I'm hearing, feel whatever I'm feeling, right? Now, not that Vikram, you really want to know my thoughts necessarily. There's some thoughts that really should just remain mine. Okay, but let's not go there. Let's not go there. This is the wholesome, seemly session. I get it, right? But fundamentally, human communication is imperfect because we use a surrogate. We use the surrogate of language, right? And language is itself imprecise, subject to misunderstanding. Okay, but let's just talk a little bit about what you just talked about, right? You just said that the person you were talking to had images in their head. Well, it might actually surprise people to know that not everybody has images in their head. I have voices in my head. Okay, it might surprise people to know that some people have voices in there. It's kind of weird, right? So let's run an experiment. And since we don't actually have an audience that I can see, Vikram, I'm going to use you again. I apologize. And I hope you don't mind playing with me for a little bit. Okay, that just sounded a little bit ruder than it should have. But okay, we're good.
I'll tell you what you do. There is Payal who's watching. I think she's put a comment there about when you said I can't see you. I said they can't see me. He says we can see you. So let's ask Payal. Let her write what she has to say. That'd be interesting.
I don't know, but yes, I actually need
presently
a verbal response. Sorry about that. Okay, so Vikram, do me a favor, clear your mind. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm gonna ask you to think of something and you just think of it. All right. Okay. I'd like you to think of a dog.
Okay.
Got it? Okay. So if you open your eyes, Vikram, can you tell me a little bit about what you had inside your head when I asked you to think about a dog? Did you see a dog?
Yeah.
Yep.
I did.
Did you hear the dog barking?
No.
No sounds. Just that image. Okay. Did you feel a dog? No. Okay. So far only visual.
Only visual.
Did you and people who own dogs will understand this? Did you smell a dog? No. Okay.
It's been a long time since I owned one, so maybe that.
Maybe. In the dark recesses of your memory, right? Okay. And I know the joke is that in Asia we're supposed to eat everything. So I won't ask about tasting the dog. We won't do that, right? That just be in bad taste, right? Okay. But fundamentally, one more question. Did you see the word DOG or any other word?
No. It's like that image of the dog is what is so strong.
That's all
right
you got.
now. So,
that's all you got. Okay, cool. Now that's interesting because I hope that people who are listening to this themselves have some experience of what they had inside their head when I say think of a dog, right? Because I've already said, we take information in through one of 5 ways: our eyes, our ears, our touch, our smell, and our taste, right? We represent information to ourselves in 5 plus 1. So for example, when we take in something from the world and we represent it inside our head, we can represent it as a picture and or a sound and or a sensation and or a smell and or a taste and or a word. So Vikram, you clearly had a visual image, a picture of a dog.
I got a message that person, Payal, also saw only a visual, so I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah. No. You're absolutely normal. Whatever you saw is normal. There's no judgment.
All right. No, suddenly I was worried. What is not working here?
I'll tell you, I don't see a picture of a dog. I actually see the word DOG.
Wow.
Right?
That's
People are
interesting.
different. People are different, right? I'm willing to bet that about 20% of our audience could hear a dog barking. I'm willing to bet that 20% of the audience could feel a dog and maybe even smell a dog. No, not going to taste, not going to taste, right? But fundamentally, people have different representational systems. So we sometimes, and we shouldn't do this, but we sometimes say that they are a visual person or an auditory person or a kinesthetic person or an olfactory person or a gustatory person or a digital person, because those represent visual, okay, sound, right? So sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, and words, right? So we call these representational systems. Now, here's the interesting thing about representational systems. We have a particular preference in how we take in information and communicate information. So there's some people, like, for example, have you ever noticed that people really like PowerPoint? Right? People really like PowerPoint. Why? Because a large proportion of the world like to take in information visually. So PowerPoint is perfect for that visual, right? Here's the problem. When you go to a law professor who is not a visual person, but they have to use PowerPoint, here's what they do. They take a whole bunch of words and put it on the PowerPoint. So it's death by PowerPoint, right? And then they flash it, and then they just read the words out to you, and then you're reading the words and you're wondering why you use PowerPoint, right? Now, there's some people who love lectures, by the way, and people who love lectures are auditory, right? So I'm not saying that, Vikram, you are visual and only visual. That's not true. We do a bit of all six, but we have preferences. We have preferences, right? We specialize in certain sorts of things. So let me share with you some ideas about how we specialize. So for example, my wife is very strongly visual, right? So she literally has movies running inside her head, okay? Once we were renovating our house and she came to me with a color card. You know what, those color wheels where you can look at different colors? She says, darling, do you like this red or do you like this red? I can't tell the damn difference. But not wanting to seem stupid, and of course, wanting to continue being loved by my wife, I look thoughtful. And I said, both are okay. Which do you like? My wife and I have been married 27 years. I love her dearly. And she looks at me after hearing me say that. She goes, you really can't tell the difference, can you?
She knows you well, yes.
She knows me very well.
But she's still trying. She's still trying.
And I said, nope. She goes, this is fire engine red, this is crimson red. And I said, I can't tell the difference. Which one do you like?
But tell me, Joel, interestingly, everyone is actually seeing the world differently. I keep telling people, look, what I'm seeing out there, that green that I'm seeing is maybe not the green that you are seeing. And
exactly right. Exactly right.
So, yeah,
In fact, there is no way we could tell whether the green you're seeing is the green I'm seeing.
Exactly. Yeah.
There is no way. No way. Right? That's why it's all subjective, right? Okay. So my wife specializes in the visual. I have a friend whose family is very musically skilled, right? They're what we call pitch perfect. They have a game in their house. The game in their house is this: whenever anyone farts, the two daughters will run to the piano, and the winner is the first person that hits the key that matches the note of the fart.
Oh.
Okay. The first time I encountered this, I was having dinner in their home, and I didn't know what the hell happened. It was like someone farted. That was embarrassing enough. It wasn't me. And then suddenly these two girls ran for the piano, and the next thing I heard was ching. And I'm going, what the hell was going on? I don't know. And my friend had to explain it to me. She was a little bit embarrassed, but she was close friends, so it was all right. Now, some people specialize in kinesthetics. What that means is, like, sports people are very good with their bodies, right? They can see something, they can replicate it, they can learn something fairly easily using their bodies, right? People who are sculptors are very good with their fingers, they're very good tactilely. These are also kinesthetic people, right? Now, I'll talk about olfactory and gustatory in the same sentence or the same breath, because it's about smell and taste, right? We already know people who are great cooks connoisseurs of food and wine can tell the difference between grapes that were pressed and picked in winter and grapes that were picked in spring or whatever it was, grown in clay soil, picked by a 17-year-old French woman who was then stepped on by a 68-year-old Italian woman. I don't know, right? Me, I'm going, it's alcohol, I'll drink it. Right? My wife will go, oh, lovely color. I don't have that skill. My skill, however, is in words, right? Being legally trained, that unfortunately is part of my trade. Okay, so the choice of words, how we craft words, we're wordsmiths, right? And so the choice of words becomes very, very important in certain sorts of things, right? In training, it becomes important. As mediators, words are our bread and butter. Right now,
can I come in on words? Okay, I'll come in later.
Yes, please, please.
I
Go ahead.
won't stop your thought. I'll come in later, but please remind me to come back on words. Yeah,
I will. I'll say one sentence and I'll come back to you on it. So this is the second application on how you use NLP in mediation. Identify what representational system that person is operating out of in that moment in time. So it changes by that moment in time. And package your communication in that system. So if I know that Vikram is functioning visually right now, I'm going to try to use visual aids, PowerPoints, drawing things, use my hands to paint a picture for him. I'm going to use words which appeal to the visual senses. If I figure that Vikram is currently functioning auditorily, I will use auditory modes. If he's functioning kinesthetically, I'll use kinesthetic modes, and so on and so forth. I'll say a little bit more about that. But essentially, the takeaway is identify the representational system and communicate to them in that representational system. That way, the information goes straight in rather than they having to translate and process. Okay, I'll shut up for a moment. Vikram, you wanted to talk about the words.
Well, first, before that, interestingly, everyone's understood this visual aspect of it. I get messages, Vikram, I know that you like the visual thing, so I've prepared this for the presentation. On the words part of it, we had one session on terminology and mediation. Yeah. So interesting thing that came up because Jeannie works with community mediation. So she was saying, look, the language that we've got into mediation comes from the court system because that's where it started for them. So things like parties. So she says, we don't call them parties, we call them participants. Yeah. We don't say opening statement, we say orientation. So those words also, I think over time you'll have to get us words which are more attuned to the mediation thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as mediators, we are actually wordsmiths, right? This is why we reframe things. We don't look for a blame frame, we look for a contribution frame, we look for a forward frame, a solution frame, things like that. Right. So that's right up NLP's alley as well. Right. There's a lot more that we could talk about with language, but we truly will not have time. Okay, but representational systems, then I'm sure most of you are actually saying to yourself, okay, that's great, I understand. Figure out the representational system, communicate to them in that way, right? So if they have the circle in their head, package your communication as a circle, go straight in. If they've got the triangle, package it as a triangle, go straight in. If you've got a circle, don't make it a square, basically, right? Then the question is got to be is, how do you tell what representational system they're using at any point in time? Okay. Now, I'd like to share with you two primary ways that you can use to tell. Okay. One way is actually how their eyes are moving. Okay. So in NLP, we have what we call an eye accessing chart or eye movement chart, right? And the idea is that when your eyes move in a particular direction, it is accessing a particular representational system. Okay. So I'm sure you have seen people do this. They'll go, let me see, right? And their eyes go up, whether it's to the left or right, it does not matter for our purposes today. But if their eyes go up, chances are they're accessing visually. I will throw visual information at them, right? Now, if their eyes go horizontally to the left and to the right, all right, they are processing auditorily. I will therefore throw auditory representations in. Right. Now, and this is the tricky part, because when eyes go to the left and right, A very common interpretation of that in body language is that they are being shifty-eyed, they cannot be trusted. Which is firstly very unfair to us Chinese, because they always say Chinese are very narrow eyes, but it's the fact that we also have a very auditory language. So it's no surprise that our eyes go to the left and right, damn it. It's not our fault, right? Oh, we can't be trusted. Life happens, right? Now, so very easy. Looking up, visual. Side to side, auditory. Now, the tricky part is downwards. Downwards can mean either kinesthetic or digital, depending on whether it goes down to the left or it goes down to the right. Okay, for our purposes, okay, and it'll be too complicated to sort of go into the how do we make that decision. If you see the eyes go down, use what we call digital language. Use what we call digital language. I will share with you some of those language in a moment. Okay, so for our purposes, how do we tell what is a representational system anybody is using? Eyes go up is visual, eyes go horizontal is auditory, eyes go down, use digital. All right, now that's the first way you can tell. The second way you can tell what representational system the person is operating out of is through what we call predicates. Okay, predicates, the more common name for it, or the more easily understood name, is sense-based words. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, words that we use that relate to one of the senses. So for example, see, show, look, find are all visual representational words, right? So when somebody says, I don't see what you're saying, or somebody says, can you show me this again? They are giving you clues that they're operating visually. And that's when you need to match them at that visual level. Right? Now, what are auditory predicates? Hear, talk, discuss. Right? These are words which are auditory predicates. Ask, sound. These are all auditory predicates. Right? So somebody may say it doesn't sound right. I have a few questions to ask. We need to talk about this a little bit more. Right? You hear people say that. That's auditory, throw auditory at them. Okay. Now, there are also kinesthetic words. So for example, they will say things like, hold on a moment. I can't get a handle on this. So words like hold, handle, grasp, feel, grip. These are all kinesthetic words. Now, finally, what we call digital words, right? And so these are words like seem, think, know, consider, sense. These words are not connected to any of the five senses. You can think visually, or auditorily, or kinesthetically, right? So the word think itself is not connected to a sense. That's why we would say they are digital. They stand by themselves. They matter above the senses, right? So how might you use this? How might you use this, right? Remember, identify the representational system through the eyes or the words, and then send it that way. So if somebody says to you, I don't see what you're saying, I will say, look, my perspective is we need to find some way to show this to you differently. So I'm just throwing in visual predicates, right? If someone says it doesn't sound right, I say, listen, I hear you. We need to talk about this a little bit more and ask ourselves the right question. If somebody says, I really can't get a grip on this, hold on a moment. We can get a handle on this, right? If we feel our way around the concepts. Somebody says, I don't understand digital. Then you might say, it seems to me that we need to form a committee to think about this a little bit more and engage in discussions and consider all the different options before we can understand this better. Now, I don't know who talks like that. Actually, no, I know a lot of people who talk like that, right? But you can see that what we're trying to essentially do is identify what the representational system is and then match that representational system, right? Now, you may say to yourself, well, hang on a moment. So let me give you two cautions. The first caution is this: nobody is 100% of everything. So if I'm having a conversation with Vikram and I notice that during this particularly challenging part of the conversation, he's being visual. For me to make it easier for him to digest what I have to say, I throw it out to him in visual modes. Because it's like language, right? I don't know if how many of you speak a foreign language, but have you ever noticed that when you are speaking a foreign language, you get very tired? Because you hear the foreign language, then inside your brain, you've got to translate it to whatever your primary language is, right? It's the same with representational systems. You treat it as different languages, right? Now, but I'm not going to assume that Vikram is visual forever and ever and ever, because the next minute, he might actually be functioning kinesthetically. Really depends on what the conversation is about, what he's feeling at that moment in time, right? So don't stereotype, don't pigeonhole people. Always be calibrating to the person in front of you, or we say, lose your mind and come to your senses. Okay, that's the first thing I would say. Now, so fundamentally, identify representations, match them, and you will find that the course of conversation will be far, far smoother than if you tried something else. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about this. We literally, in the past, there were literally videos of two people talking. One person was saying, this is a client, the other person's a therapist. One person was saying, gee, doc, I can't get a handle on things. You know, life feels really heavy. The other guy goes, life feels heavy. I don't see what you're saying. Look, share with me your perspective. Share my perspective. You don't get it. I mean, I can't connect. And the guy, the visual guy goes, connect. Show me what you mean. And so it's like two people talking two different languages, and they can't understand one another. As mediators, we don't want to be one of those people. And certainly if our participants are one of those people, we need to help them translate, bridge that gap. Yeah. Okay. Right. So this is what we refer to as representational systems. And matching someone's representational system will help build rapport, essentially. Okay. I'll stop here, Vikram, just in case you have any questions or you wanted to make a comment.
I mean, I'm looking at some point, is the sixth sense ever going to come up in this, or is just not going to be? It's not part of the entire discussion, and something on the subconscious mind and that part.
Yeah, so there are two aspects of this, right? Sometimes we use sixth sense and subconscious mind interchangeably. NLP doesn't. Okay, so NLP basically goes, that part of your brain that you're not conscious of is your unconscious. Okay, and it's not that you don't use that part of your brain, it's just that you're not aware of using that part of the brain. So let me give you an example. Right now, you're listening to me, but you're breathing. You don't have to consciously breathe. Your unconscious does that for you. If you've just had lunch, your digestive system is helping you digest your food. You don't have to think about it, right? When for example, you raise your hand, if I'm not wrong, if you raise your hand, there are like 152 muscles that are involved in raising your hand. You don't actually have to say muscle 38, can you move now muscle 42 and then muscle 132. You don't. You just raise your hand and your hand raises, right? So in NLP, when we say unconscious, we're basically saying that the more you're in touch with your unconscious, the more resources you have. Okay, but that's very different from the sixth sense, right? Now, NLP would say that if point me to someone with very good sixth sense, we will model it and we will replicate it, right? So a lot of people, what people call sixth sense is what we call intuition, right? My wife has great intuition, right? And what intuitors actually do, if you think about it structurally, is this. They start from one point here, they will chunk upwards to something more abstract, and then they will come down somewhere else, down here. So to the people who don't follow that thought process, it looks to us like they've jumped from here to here instantaneously. And these two things may not even be connected in our minds. But for the person with the sixth sense or the intuition, actually it is connected. It's connected at this upper level that we're not privy to, right? So anyone who's familiar with the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type inventory, right? There is one continuum called the sensor intuitor that specifically measures this. 75% of the world are sensors. We're details people, right? 25% of the world are intuitors. Big picture concepts. There are downsides to being a big picture concept person, right? Big picture concept people can somehow make connections, brilliant connections. Sometimes they will make connections that are so freaking wrong, it's so out of the ballpark that they go, how the hell did that happen? People who are intuitors will tend to make a lot of assumptions because they make these leaps. On this side, the sensors of the world, I tell you, I'm a sensor, I'm a details person. We are mind-numbingly detail-oriented. Right? I don't know whether, Vikram, you're a sensor or an intuitor on MBTI, whether you've ever had a test done. My guess is you might be an N, actually, but
which one is that?
You might actually be an intuitor. I'm not sure. You are excellent.
Oh.
Excellent. No,
I'm not guessing. I don't know. I haven't done that test. I haven't done that test now.
Take the test. It's just fun to do. Take the test. It's just fun to do. But okay. Anyway, we went off topic. But remember, I said a little bit earlier, NLP has a personality preference model. This is part of it, right? Just think about it for a moment. Even if we just talk about people who are big picture and details, if one participant is big picture and one participant is detail, can you imagine how much tension there will be in the conversation? Because the big picture person is going to say, no, let's just talk about the heads of agreement. The details person is going to think that that guy is too airy-fairy, head in the clouds, because we need to tie down the details. This guy, the big picture guy, is going to think of the details guy as, wow, he's such a nitpicker, he's such a micromanager, such small detail. Why do we need to even tie those down? And that's how the fight started. As mediators, we have to intervene. We have to assist them in understanding one another and bring them down to the correct levels. So this is just an example of how personality preferences can make a difference.
That's interesting. That's that. Yep.
Okay. I think in the time that we have, I'd like to just quickly share a little bit about what NLP does in terms of rapport building, if that's okay with you.
I just the quickly word doesn't apply to anything that I do. There was one particular episode of Evolution of a Mediator which went on for 4 hours without a break. So time is never a factor.
I hear you. And I have to say two things. I have a 5 o'clock stop, unfortunately for myself. But I'm also a J on the MBTI. You may not know what that is, a judger. Time, my life revolves around time. So unfortunately, it is just one of those things. So, but
where do I fall, Joel? When I don't have time as the concept, where do I fall?
You probably are like my wife. You're a perceiver. Okay, but that's a different funny story. Invite me back again for NLP Part 2, and we'll talk about a whole bunch of other things. Okay, but for the moment, just so that our listeners can get just another piece where NLP can be particularly helpful. And this is where we say in rapport building. Okay. So we sometimes say in mediation, building a good relationship. NLP uses the word rapport very specifically. All right, and it's just a specialist term that we use within the field. Okay, and the idea of rapport is having a quality of relationship with someone such that what you suggest to them, they accept fairly easily. Right? So what you suggest to them, they accept fairly easily. So when you have rapport with somebody, they tend to trust you. And then they will tend to just listen to and pretty much accept what you're suggesting to them. Right? Okay. Now, rapport can be built in a number of different ways. Right? I've already shared with you one way, which is to match someone's representational system. Okay. The fundamental principle in rapport is what we call pacing and leading. Pacing means to match somebody else, okay, to pace them, right? So when you speak in their representational systems, you're pacing them. What are other ways of pacing them? Well, we all know that the majority of communication is not verbal, it's not words. In fact, some people will say that words really only make up 7% of the entire communication package, right? And that actually 93% are either our physiology, our body language, or the tonality that we use, right? Now, I won't go into the breakdown of that, okay? But fundamentally, you can build rapport with somebody else by matching their non-verbals, So let's start off with, say, let's talk about the physiology first and what we can do to match someone's physiology, right? So in terms of physiology, there are a number of things you can match. One thing you can match is posture. So what we mean by posture is how someone holds themselves. So they could have good posture, they could have a slump posture, their shoulders could actually be skewed, they could be leaning against the wall, they could be standing on one leg. You know how some people, when they stand, their feet are not evenly balanced. There's sometimes more one weight or one the other. When you sit down, are your feet flat on the ground? Do you cross your legs? Are your legs together? Do you do what they call a number 4 position, where you take one ankle and put it on the knee, right? There are a number of different postures that you can adopt. A second thing that you can adopt are gestures. So I'm sure you've noticed when people talk, they gesture. I gesture a lot, right? Conventional wisdom is that Italians gesture a lot, right? But I do a lot of that. You've seen that in my hands, right? That's something you can match. You can also match, for example, things like facial expression. So when people smile, you can smile back, right? That's actually a very natural thing to do. In fact, it is actually very natural to build rapport with people. It's actually much harder the other way around, breaking rapport with people. Okay. Finally, the final thing you can match physiologically is breathing. I know it sounds a bit weird, okay, but I'll give you a tip as to how to match breathing. Okay. Now, so what do we mean by matching in all of this, pacing all of this is real simple. How the person sits, sit like them within reason, right? If they raise their right hand when talking, okay, when it's your turn to talk, move your right hand. I'm not saying raise it to the same level. Don't do something that's so obvious that it's a mimicry, right? We are just unconsciously communicating to the other person that, hey, I'm like you. And people like people who are like themselves, right? Okay. If they cross their legs, they shift back in their seat and cross their legs. I'll wait for a few seconds before I shift back in my seat and cross my legs. Right? Okay. If they are gesturing when they talk, I will gesture when I talk. If their gestures are huge, I wouldn't do it. Right? Now, finally, you ever notice that people nod their head when you talk? Yeah. Talk at the rate at which they're nodding their head. That's right. So you know, some people nod their head very fast, you can talk faster. If some people, there's a rhythm, because that's the internal rhythm. That's the rhythm in which they're processing. So if you talk at that rhythm, the word cell fits straight in. It's like musical notes. But if they are nodding slowly and you're talking quickly, there will be a disjoint and there will be no rapport at all. Okay. Now, so I've shared just a little bit in terms of physiological matching. It's far more complex than that, right? And again, if this was a training, I demonstrate. I'll show you a negative example. I'll show you a positive example. There are many other nuances that, like, for example, when you're trying to match someone's breathing, don't look at someone's chest. In today's woke and culture, cancel culture world, you're going to get called out. Don't #MeToo. Do not look at someone's chest, right? The way that you can tell whether someone's breathing out, when they are talking, they're breathing out. Just think about it for a moment. You can't breathe in and talk at the same time. Most people cannot. If you're musically trained and you play the trumpet, maybe you can. But most of us aren't. Okay. So that's physiological, right? Physiology, how to match physiology. How do we match components of voice? There is volume. There is pitch. So volume is how loud and how soft. Pitch, how high pitch or how low pitch. There is what we call rhythm. Rhythm is how fast or how slow. And then there is, of course, what we call timbre or timbre. How clear or distorted the voice is. Do they have an accent? Do they slang? Right? Now, so for example, the two things that I would recommend people to match, which is fairly easy to do, is volume and speed. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you're on the phone with somebody, you pick up the phone, you call the number, and you go, "Hello, can I speak to Bob, please?" And you hear this. "Hello, this is Bob," right? And you are on the other side, you're going, "Will you hurry the heck up, please?" Right? And you think that the solution to fixing this is to speak very, very fast. But actually, the solution to that is to actually slow down to their speed first, and then slowly lead them to a faster speed. Right? So I do this a fair bit when I talk to people. Now, when you do a mediation and there are two different parties and there are different speeds, okay, the trick therefore is match enough of the fast speed to still maintain rapport, but you need to go to this guy over here, talk to them at his speed, and speed him up. So you need to take them this way so that they are roughly matching each other in terms of their speed, right? Okay, that's one way to not just build rapport with the participants, but you're getting the parties to build rapport with one another. In other words, you're synchronizing the group, if you think about it that way. Okay. Volume is tricky because a lot of people think that if the person's shouting, you shouldn't shout. I'll tell you a very funny story that occurred. They taught American Express customer representatives this, right? And I don't know if you know, customer representatives have a very difficult job because they're on the phone all day, and the other side is usually somebody who's unhappy, okay? Something to complain about. So in the old days, they used to teach customer representatives this. They used to say, remain calm, speak in a level voice, in a measured voice, and don't get excited. It's never worked. I don't know if you've ever had experience of going home to your spouse or your partner or your friend, and they are upset with you. And they're telling you how upset and what they're upset about. And you have tried this. You said, "Dear, calm down. Let's discuss this like reasonable people." In my 27 years of marriage, that has never worked. Never in the history of calming down has telling someone to calm down ever worked. If it has for you, congratulations, but not in my experience. Most of the time, if you calm down and you tell them to calm down, you know what they do? They get louder and more strident because they feel you have not heard them. Right? So what they told the American Express customer representatives was this. They said, Match them in volume, but not the fighting words. The content of the words must be collaborative. And then quickly bring them down, right? So they're up here, you match them here, but quickly bring them down. So if the guy calls up and says, you guys are idiots, you can't get my accounts right, I'm really pissed off with you, I'm going to cancel my class. The representatives who were supposed to do this, they said, sir, I'm very sorry to hear that you're upset, and I'm here to help you. Could you just slow down a little bit and help me understand what the problem is so that I can help you? Right? So the words were not fighting words, but you were matching the non-verbals to bring them down. And sometimes what would happen is they would match and it will bring them down, but they will only come down a little bit, not all the way. Then what the customer representative did would be match again and bring them down a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong with that because there is no failure, only feedback, right? Okay. And I found rapport particularly helpful to do, but let me give you a word of caution. When you're dealing with parties or participants in a mediation, build rapport with participants using the tone, basically the elements of voice, and using representational systems. Do not match your body language to them. And the reason why I say this is you don't want to be sitting like one party and not the other, because then they might interpret you as being not neutral. So you can wave your hands, you can do those, you can smile, but do not sit like them. Do not angulate your postures that indicates that you might have a preference for one or the other. Even if you don't have a preference for one or the other, people might misunderstand, right? So if you're negotiating, I don't care, match as much body language as you like, right? If you're a mediator, you have to be careful about that particular caveat, right? Because I don't want you to hear this and then get yourself in trouble because of that. Okay, all right. I'm going to shut up now and maybe take any questions Vikram might have before I take goodbye.
On the synchronous part,
Yeah.
Ken was talking about this interesting thing. There was some experiment which was done where they had it's one of the speed dating kind of things. So they had these people going around meeting people. So with the people that they connected to, what's the experiment? The result was that actually their breathing and their heartbeats matched.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just thinking that in a mediation, when you're connecting well and everything's going well, we should actually check this out. Is the breathing and the heartbeat actually going together of everyone?
Well, actually, Vikram, neuroscience, there are people who are suggesting that we should just hook participants up to electrodes that we can then measure their heartbeat and their blood pressure and their brainwave patterns. Now, I think that's going a little bit far. I would have trouble with that. But fundamentally, neuroscience has shown that when people are actually in agreement, their rapport, their heartbeats synchronize. Okay, it's one of those weird things that we only know now. NLP has talked about this all these years, but we can only prove this now because of advances in neuroscience.
Oh, interesting stuff. But look, the point was, of course, this communication as in someone accessing certain aspects. But again, I'll go back to the subconscious mind part of it. Can you connect to a point when that person is not accessing everything? It's actually flowing out. Because
it's a flow state, right? So sports people go into that. Excellent presentation. It's being in the zone. I think a lot of times they describe. And so a lot of the times when you're actually in rapport with somebody, it's almost as if you can't tell who's speaking because it's just flowing. No one's really leading, right? And we have exercises that we do in person where we actually match each other's body language. There's a leader and there's a follower, but after a while, there's no leader, no follower. Everyone's just synchronized, right? So and it's a most unusual experience. I just wish we could do it justice in this medium.
That's it, because I keep talking about this whole concept that you have a quantum computer up there. And quantum is because we use that word. I'm sure maybe many times that. And the fact that you can actually reach a point when you're not filtering things out. So you're actually taking that whole output of that quantum computer and putting it out there, because what I realize is that people, because they're actually, I keep saying, it's like sitting with a calculator and trying to process what a quantum computer has given you. So that flow going totally as it comes to you naturally, let it flow. So that part of it, I feel that that's the way communication should happen. I mean, it
No,
doesn't.
it should. It should be easy. It should be an easy feeling to it. It should be open channels. It should flow, right, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And from NLP's perspective, if you've got rapport with somebody, you can help that flow.
Yeah. So I'm not going to hold you back. I know it's your 5 o'clock already. 1 minute to go.
1 minute
So
to go. Oh no!
yeah.
Thank you for keeping note of the time.
So if there is one closing kind of thing, because look, part two has to happen, Joel. Part two has to happen, but we'll
It will be my pleasure.
yeah, we'll do so. We'll work out something that you need audience, as it seems, in the physical space, or in the sense Zoom space. We'll look at that also, because I tell you, this is more convenient for me, but you're not managing people
I
in
quite
that,
understand. Quite
and they're
understand. Yeah.
watching whenever. So it makes life a lot easier for me also. And what happens is people haven't over time got a chance to really put in too much, because I am the one who actually has had those conversations. So I think for them it's better. I've realized that it's better that they can watch that. So, but if
Yeah.
you want, we can.
But that's true. And we adapt to whatever medium works. It's fine. There's no worries.
So
Yeah.
Joel, whatever closing, whatever you want to tell us.
Well, firstly, I thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this. I look forward to a part two if we can swing it. But fundamentally, those of you who are mediators, you're doing good work. I mean, we need more peacemakers. We live in a very weird place. It's I think gotten a little bit weirder this year. But those of us who are out there spreading this message, either through our work or our teachings or trainings, we need more peacemakers. We need more people to help think about collaboration, sustainability. I believe we didn't talk about the soul of mediation, but I think we need to preserve that soul of mediation. It's fundamentally where the value of mediation actually is. And I hope I wish us all the best in continuing to do that.
Well, actually, I forgot about this, but I think we need a session with you on your Asian perspective to mediation, which you have spoken about some. I think you've done some research or whatever.
Yeah, I'm at your disposal. We'll figure it out.
Because I tell you, this conference, of course, now is the 30th. Tomorrow, I think tomorrow is the last day of sessions as such.
Yeah.
We have one session on the 30th also, but that would have also been an interesting thing to bring in, because there was a symposium I did last year, which was called Mediation in Our Culture and Traditions. So boasting about it, it was called the Woodstock of Mediation by someone. There were 97 speakers from 45 countries.
Nice.
But in there was someone from Indonesia, and she works in high conflict, violent kind of places where there's violence. And she talks about how she's connected with the heart, and which is what I was talking about, because I talk about this heart soul spirituality thing. And she said people have actually broken down while talking to her. And she, of course, was looking at, let's talk about an Asian model. So you've spoken about it. So maybe we should have some discussion on that.
Happy to come in for a session like that.
So thank you, Joel. Really
the
nice
pleasure's been
talking to
mine.
you.
Thank you for having me.
This, I'm saying, the last minute thing you've done is really good, and this is a subject which I think people will be really interested in. I think
I hope it has been helpful to you and the listeners.
Totally, for me, it's been amazing. I've loved it.
Thank you.
Kept the time limit. You kept the time limit. Look, I would have gone on.
Thank you for putting up with my bad jokes.
No, lovely. I've enjoyed listening to them on webinars. I was enjoyed listening